on our career services website and also on our different social media pages. With that being said, I wanted to remind you that your hosts today are myself, Justin Gomez, and I work as the Assistant Director for Career and Professional Development in Career Services. And Cass?
Yeah, and I'm Cassie. I'm a career coach in UNLV Career Services, and I'm really excited to hear what Greg has to say today.
Awesome. So later on, Cassie and I are going to provide our contact information about how you can get in touch with us. And so we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our guest presenter today, Greg Wilken. Greg, take it away.
Well, thank you, Justin and Cassie. Let me, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Greg.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just, let me pull up my screen so that we can get going. I apologize. Just 1 minute. Here we go. And okay, so can you see the first slide?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. Well, good morning. Well, I guess it's afternoon. We're a couple of minutes after noon. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. Thank you to Justin and Cassie and the rest of the team at UNLV Career Services for putting this on. So as Justin said, I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so kind of talking about leveraging your human resources. And I emphasize the word your, because really your strengths, your expertise, your experience, and how you go about conducting a job search, no matter where you are in your job search, in a time of quarantine and social distancing. I'll tell you just real quickly about my background, and I promise I won't spend too much time talking about myself because I want to get right into the material. But I own my own human resources company here in Las Vegas. It's called Endunamo Consulting. I've been running this company for about 2 years. Prior to that, I spent my entire career in human resources. And I have worked in a number of corporate HR departments, have had a lot of experience with talent acquisition, recruiting, hiring, and a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today. I also have had a couple of transitions myself personally in my career. So I've been on sort of both sides of the job search equation, hiring people and also being a candidate myself. And in fact, I worked for Northwest Airlines, which was headquartered in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and lost my job in 2009. That was really the last time we went through a very, very severe recession. The travel industry, because of a number of things that were going on, not quite as bad as it is today, but very similar. Found myself looking for work in a very slow economy. And so I've been, as I said, kind of both sides of the equation. And hopefully what I can share with you today will be of some help to all of you. So let's jump in. This is what I put together as an agenda. Why bother? If you read the news, and I would encourage you to not spend too much time reading the news, but clearly we're in the worst economic period that we have been, some are saying, since the Great Depression. The job market literally went from being one of the best ever in terms of unemployment to probably the worst ever. So you may ask yourself, why even bother looking for a job in this environment? And I'll give you some reasons why I think it's important. What to do now, both in the short term and in the kind of midterm, to really prepare yourself for when the economy begins to recover and things come back. We'll talk about the nuts and bolts, some of the specific things about conducting a job search, particularly in this environment. I want to spend a little time talking about onboarding, because that's an important part of your job. Not necessarily your job search strategy, but certainly your professional development strategy. and then be happy to answer any questions that you may have at the end. So that's the agenda. I'm going to keep track as best I can of the time so that we have time at the end for questions. But why look, or why even think about it? If you think about what's going on right now, record unemployment. I think the latest report from the Department of Labor, 26 million people in the last month have filed for unemployment. All economic indicators are down, and obviously all of this is being driven by the coronavirus or COVID-19. And you may feel completely overwhelmed, particularly if you've lost your job, or if you are working for a company whose future seems to be very uncertain. So it's a very challenging time. It's a very frightening time, and it may seem as though this is the absolute worst time to be in transition in terms of your career. And I guess I would say I wouldn't necessarily disagree. It's not the best time, but it is also a time of opportunity, and it's a time where you can be doing some things to help position yourself for whatever comes next, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. This is something that many of you may have seen. I think I saw this on LinkedIn. I think maybe somebody else posted it on Facebook, but it's a meme that's been going around. And I think this really applies to just your personal growth and development during this time. But I think there's a lot in here that's relevant to a job search. And for those of you who have seen it before, it may be familiar. For those of you who haven't, as you can see, the concentric circles go from being in the fear zone to the learning zone to the growth zone. And as you move out in that circle, more opportunities and more kind of scenarios that involve self-growth, development that I think are important. And the first thing I would say is if you're in that fear zone, that's okay. These are very frightening and very unprecedented times. We're all experiencing ranges of emotions that we haven't, and that's okay. And if you find yourself looking at this and say, oh, I'm right there in that fear zone, that's okay. But I would encourage you to think about trying to move out, kind of expand how you think and expand your opportunities as things go on. And out there on that growth zone, you can see some things like I make my talents available to those who need them. I keep a happy and emotional state and spread hope. I look for a way to adapt to new changes. Those are all things that will be very helpful to you if you find yourself in transition and looking for a new opportunity. And I'll talk about those when we get into the specifics in a few minutes. But with that, if you are interested in kind of moving into those two outer zones, the learning zone and the growth zone, I'll talk a little bit about maybe some specific things you could do. So the first thing I would say is to sort of pause and reset. And this would apply regardless of where you are in your professional life, whether you are unemployed because your job has been eliminated, your company went out of business. It could apply whether you are still with an organization or a company, but you're kind of questioning your role there, either because the future seems uncertain or because you just haven't been real happy with how your company has responded to the pandemic. And maybe it's given you an opportunity or forced you to think about your employer in a different way. Or it could be that you've just, because of all of this, you've kind of reordered your priorities, where you are professionally, where you are personally, and you've used this as an opportunity to think about doing something different. So wherever you are kind of in your career, I think this is it's a good time to use this as an opportunity for some reflection or self-improvement. Where are you in your career? Is it where you want to be? Are there goals? Are there priorities that you have that are different? And with that, kind of do a self-assessment. There are a lot of good ones online, but it really just spend some time asking those, deep and sometimes difficult questions. Am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Do I feel like I'm making a difference? A few practical things. Consider how urgent your job search is. Obviously, if you're unemployed and you have bills, if you have people who depend on you, it's much more urgent than if you've just decided maybe you want to do something different. After you've done that, create a timeline for yourself, and how quickly would you like to make a change that may be driven by external factors, that may be driven by internal factors, but put together a rough timeline of how quickly you'd like to make a change. And then most importantly, be patient. Things, at least with respect to the job market, are moving very slowly. Human resource departments of most companies, and that's typically where you find the recruiters, are overwhelmed with other things: layoffs, furloughs, leave, testing, medical testing. So hiring, onboarding might not be a priority. Be patient. After you've kind of done a pause and reset, and if you find that, like a lot of us do, you have some free time on your hand, if you are unemployed, if your job maybe has been cut back to part-time, use this time really as productively as you can. There are a lot of good online classes. There always have been, but in this environment, a lot of the major universities are offering classes online for free or for reduced cost. So take advantage of online classes, both professionally and just personally, if you're interested in history, if you're interested in science, if you're interested in something. But it will help you in your job search. It will help you just overall. Write an article. It's so easy to publish these days, whether it's on LinkedIn, it's your own blog, or on other websites. But get yourself out there, develop your brand, strengthen your brand. Do a webinar. We're all spending a lot more time on meetings like this, Zoom meetings, GoToMeetings, webinars, and a lot of the organizations are looking for content providers. So if you have an area of interest, if you have an area of expertise, offer to do a webinar. Again, it will help you to establish your brand, and it will also help you to feel as though you're making a difference. If you do have some free time, consider a temp assignment, freelance work, gig work, whether that's kind of in the creative areas, writing, publishing, social media, or maybe just working at a job that you know is going to be temporary. Amazon is hiring hundreds of thousands of employees because they're so busy. Other companies have gotten very busy as a result of the change in our social lives. So think about doing that. Lots of opportunities to volunteer. Most all the nonprofits in town are still operating. In fact, many of them are busier than ever. So whether you are interested in helping distribute food, gather clothing for the homeless population, whatever it happens to be, there are lots of opportunities. And then finally, create your own internship. A lot of companies and organizations have had to scale back, but that doesn't mean that all of the work has gone away. And you may be able to find a company who is willing to take you on as an intern, either as a volunteer intern or maybe paying you a small amount to pick up some of the work that they had been doing before with full-time paid employees. And kind of be creative about how you think about that and how you approach that. So let's talk a little bit about effective job search strategies. We've covered how to use this time and some areas to stay sharp, stay relevant, and improve your skills. But what are the actual things to do if you find yourself in the midst of a job search? So pre-pandemic, there were a few important things to do. Have a good, well-written resume. Make sure that you're on LinkedIn. Actively engage in networking and do your research when it comes to potential companies you'd like to work for. Post-pandemic, very similar. Have a good, strong resume, be on LinkedIn, engage in networking, and do your research. So on one level, it hasn't really changed. Now, how you go about doing those things is very different, and some of them are significantly different. And I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But for those of you who have been in job searches before, the good news is that it isn't all that different, at least as far as the building blocks of it. Just how you execute on some of those strategies is going to look a little bit different in this environment. So we're going to walk you through each of those and talk about both some general best practices, but then specifically, how do you modify your strategies in the environment that we're in? So your resume. Resumes are somewhat like typewriters or landlines or fax machines. They're somewhat a thing of the past. There's so much now electronic applications, online applications and whatnot, but they still are very important. Recruiters still look at them. Even maybe not a paper resume, but certainly an online resume. So still important to have one, and still important to put some time into it. And even just the process of putting your resume together is helpful. It forces you to think about how to present yourself, what to highlight, how to format your resume. So even though it's not as important as it was maybe 20 years ago, it's still an important document, and it's an important exercise to go through. Very important to customize your resume for every job that you're applying for. It's gotten a lot easier to do that now than it used to be when you printed your resume off and it was a fairly static document. Now you really can tailor it, and if you find yourself with a little more time on your hands, it's even easier to do that. So every job that you apply for, I would urge you to somewhat customize your resume. You don't need to redo the whole thing, but if you have a resume that has an objective, professional objective statement at the top, and I would encourage you to do that, rewrite that or customize that for every job that you're applying for. And the way to do that is to use what are called keywords. Most applications now, or most recruiting is done using artificial intelligence, and that's just software that electronically scans every application or every resume that comes in, and it matches keywords in your resume to what's in the job description. So at that very initial stage of applying for jobs, most likely that a human being is not even going to look at your resume. So you want to have the keywords from the job description right up front in your resume, and that will increase your chances of getting past that first screening to a recruiter, or even better, to a hiring manager. And then lastly, isn't really part of your resume, but it's part of the initial communication to a company. I would urge everyone to use a cover letter. In my experience of recruiting for open positions, very few applicants use them. And if you do, you will really stand out. You'll set yourself apart from everyone else. So put together a short 2 or 3 paragraph template cover letter that you could use, and then modify it. As you modify your resume, modify your cover letter. So opening paragraph that includes the job title in it, second paragraph that has that is responsive, and then a final paragraph that talks a little bit about your availability to come in for an interview or to move forward in the process. But if you do that, you really will kind of move to the top of the pile. Next is LinkedIn. And actually, Justin, I think maybe I'll pause here and see if there are any questions. I didn't build slides in with questions, but I'll take a break every 3 or 4 slides to see if there are any questions.
Hi, Greg. So far in our chat, doesn't look like we actually do have a question.
Okay.
The question is, do you have any advice on finding and creating your own internship?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are, I think on the UNLV Career Services website, and at the very end, I've got a slide with some really helpful resources, which includes the Career Services Office. I think there's a listing of internships, and so that's a good place to start. As you're networking on LinkedIn, you can, if you identify a company that you're interested in, reach out to the Human Resources Department and ask about internships. Some companies, particularly the bigger companies, will promote them or advertise them the way they do open positions. But back to the slide that I mentioned about creating your own internship. That's going to require you a little bit to think outside the box because it's sort of identifying a need that a company has that they may not even know about. But with the economy and with as hundreds or thousands of companies have had to really scale back, there are opportunities to maybe come in and pick up most likely a temporary internship until they start recalling their employees, but you may be able to do that. So I would identify first in the industry you want to be in, second, the companies that you want to work for. Try to identify somebody in their HR department and then reach out to them and just either see if they have an internship or if it's possible that they may consider one. Put together a little business proposal of how you might fill that need for them. And then if nothing else, if it doesn't turn into an internship, it at least shows your initiative. And if that company then starts hiring again, you're going to be in a real good position because you've been very proactive and taken the initiative. So hope that answers your question. And when I get to the end, if you have any follow-up questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. So let's talk a little bit about LinkedIn. I should have had a poll question, but the poll question is how many people who are on the line today are on LinkedIn and are active on LinkedIn? And it's kind of a trick question because the answer should be 100%. LinkedIn is has been very important in your career development strategy for many years in this environment where so much of the networking, so much of job hunting and job filling is done virtually. LinkedIn has become even more important. So if you're not on it already, I would highly encourage you to do so. If you are on LinkedIn, use this as an opportunity to kind of review your profile and enhance it a little bit. So a few specific things about LinkedIn. Use this as an opportunity to take a look at your profile, your headshot, your headline, the summary of your skills. Those are the first 3 things, and sometimes the only 3 things that a recruiter may see in your entire profile. So make sure those are presenting yourself the way you want to be presented, visually and in terms of the substance. Show off your transferable skills. This is an opportunity where a lot of movement in the job market. Some companies have significantly scaled back where other companies are growing like crazy. And so if you were working for a company that has scaled back operations, and is not likely to come back quickly, but you have transferable skills that could be applied to a company that's growing, highlight those and describe them in a way that indicates they are transferable from one company to another, one industry to another. Like, comment, and publish. The LinkedIn algorithms really benefit and are really designed to encourage social interaction. So it's easy to like somebody else's post. All you have to do is one click. Better off if you can comment on it. And finally, the best way to really raise your profile on LinkedIn is to publish articles. And very easy to do it. LinkedIn provides all the tools, and it makes it very easy. So if you've seen something, if you've read something that is of interest, you want to summarize it. If you have an idea about something, try to get active publishing in LinkedIn. It will raise your visibility to recruiters, to headhunters, to hiring managers. Few things at the end of your profile. You can seek endorsements from coworkers, from former coworkers. I noticed recently that LinkedIn has just recently added a skills quiz in the endorsement section. So you can actually take a quiz that will identify skills that you have and then add those to your endorsement page. And ask for recommendations. Again, LinkedIn has made it very easy for you to reach out to connections that you have and write them a short request for a recommendation. But those will help really enhance your profile and move you to the top of searches on LinkedIn. And while you're at it, review the rest of your social media profile. So review if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook. Remove anything that might might be perceived as unprofessional, might be perceived as maybe a little bit outdated, but just be conscious of your entire social media presence. Networking, everybody's favorite topic, networking. And if you've been on any career development webinars, workshops, classes, you'll hear the importance of networking. It still is as important as it always was. It's just changed pretty considerably in the last couple of months, and likely will continue to be very different than it was before. The good news is that if for the introverts on the line out there, you can now network without ever having to leave your house. You don't have to get in your car. You don't have to force yourself to eat really bad appetizers or juggle your plate and trying to have a conversation with somebody, because at least for the time being, most networking is done online now. So the first idea there is to get comfortable with online networking. And if this is new to you, I would encourage you just to spend time on LinkedIn. Facebook has a lot of groups that you can be active in, but just try to get your presence out there. The next step is attending webinars, participating in webinars, attending Zoom meetings. A lot of the kind of networking groups like the Chambers of Commerce, the professional development groups are holding online networking. So become familiar with that, become comfortable with that. Strengthen your online connections. Talked a little bit about that. As far as LinkedIn. So be active, liking things, commenting on things, publishing things, and very easy. If you want to build your own website, you can do it in really just a few clicks, a few pictures, and you have your own website that you can refer people to. And if you are creating content, you could put that on your website. And then the final one, touch base with former colleagues, alumni, and friends. This is an environment where it's really important to stay socially connected. And we're not able to meet for coffee. We're not able to meet for lunch. We're not able to meet for drinks, at least not physically. But it's a good opportunity to reach out to maybe people you haven't seen for a while, talked to for a while, and just check in with them. They will appreciate it, you will appreciate it, and it's also a good way to just continue your professional growth and development. This, if you remember the slide from a few minutes ago, this is one of the important aspects of career development or job search in a pre-pandemic environment, and certainly continues to be. With respect to specific things that how kind of research has changed or some different strategies. If you are thinking about making a change, or if you're forced to make a change in your job, try to identify some of the growth industries and specializations. I read an article a while ago that said this has been the biggest shift in our labor force since World War II. And by that, I think that the article meant that thousands of people have not just lost their jobs, but are moving into different jobs. And we were seeing the growth in industries that either didn't exist before or were kind of on the fringes before. But some of the sectors that are really growing: healthcare, obviously, technology, biotechnology, all of the talk and all of the work being done to try to find vaccines and tests for the coronavirus. Finance and accounting are very important now because of all of the federal money that's being distributed. Accountants are in very, very high demand. So if you have an accounting background, reach out to your network in the accounting world. And then any of the essential businesses as defined by the states are very, very important now. So and that will continue for a while. There are a few specific ones. Customer service. So much of our shopping now and is being done online that call centers and customer service operations are growing. Warehouses, distribution centers, delivery and package handlers, and I mentioned accounting. A few other areas, and this I'd sort of put into the category of thinking outside the box. So if you have an interest, or better yet, skills in video production, that is really important now. Zoom is growing like crazy. So anything related to online video production, distribution, or even just helping people to sharpen their kind of their video skills is important. Dietitians are in demand now. We've had to change the way we eat pretty drastically, and there's a lot of interest in how do I maintain a healthy diet while I'm quarantining. At home exercise, all the gyms are closed. If you have an interest in personal fitness, and better yet, combine that with video capability, you could carve out a little niche in producing exercise videos or helping others produce exercise videos. And then one, and this is probably not for everyone, but I read recently that the dispensaries in Nevada, and particularly in Las Vegas, are busier than ever. And I guess everybody has a reason for why that's happening, but the reality is that the dispensaries are open. They are considered to be essential businesses, and they're very busy. So if you have an interest in and you're comfortable working in that industry, might be some opportunities. Set Google alerts. That's just once you've identified a few companies that you think might be of interest, you can set a quick Google alert and get news feeds about what they're doing. And then finally, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide about interviewing. I think it's important if you're thinking about making a career change, to look at how a particular target company has responded to the pandemic. Have they tried to maintain their employees? Are they paying them even though they're not working? Are they providing support for them, for those who are having to come in? It says a lot about a company. the way that they've responded to this pandemic. It will say a lot about the company, and will give you an insight into their culture. And with that, Justin, I think I'll pause for another second, catch my breath, and see if there are any questions on the last 2 or 3 slides.
Yeah, Greg, this is Cassie. You got quite a few questions during your sort of last set.
Okay.
So I'll kind of go, but one by one, and then hopefully we can get to all of them. So the first question that arose was, how do you approach a company or organization about an internship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and I'll answer it a couple of ways. If they have a pre-existing internship program, built-in internship program, follow whatever guidelines, whatever requirements they have for applying for that. If they don't, and I assume the question is probably more geared towards companies that don't have an existing program, try to talk to somebody in the human resources department. See, by using LinkedIn or Glassdoor or some of the others, if you can find somebody in the HR department, a recruiter might be a good place to start, or anybody in talent acquisition, and just ask them about whether they have an internship program or whether they would be interested in bringing you on as an intern. So I would encourage you to be proactive, particularly in those companies where it might not be visible or obvious if they have a program, and see if you can maybe consider get them to consider having one.
Great, thank you, Greg. And then 3 more questions. So the
Okay.
next one is, how many recommendations should your profile include on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I'd say you want to have 3 or 4 at least, if you can. Now, for those of you who are at the beginning stages of your career, you might not be able to have that many. But if you can get 3 or 4, and if you don't have an extensive work history, maybe a professor, or maybe if you've done some volunteer work, get somebody from a volunteer activity that you've done. But obviously at some point, you can just have too many. Not that it's harmful, it's just that you get to a point of diminishing returns where a recruiter or hiring manager is just not going to read that many. But if you can have 3 or 4 and they're good quality recommendations, I'd say that's perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. And then, like I said, 2 more.
Okay.
Do you recommend informational interviews as a networking tool?
Absolutely, yes. By all means, I am a big fan of informational interviews. I have gone on a lot as a candidate, or not even as a candidate, because informational interviews, by definition, there's no job, but just as a way to learn about companies, to let people know that I'm looking, and to sharpen my skills. And I'm on the other end of it. I'm often approached by people who are just interested in careers in human resources, careers in consulting, and they'll reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to be interviewed, so to speak. So I think I'm a very big proponent of informational interviewing. You learn a lot of information, and it's just a good way to practice your conversational skills. And the hesitancy that I've seen with a lot of people, if they're trying to arrange informational interviews, is often I'll hear, well, I don't want to bother them. I don't want, I know they're busy. The reality is that most people really enjoy talking about their work. And now, obviously, you can take that too far, but most people are in a job because they need to, but hopefully they're doing something that they enjoy and they like talking about it. So if you can spend 30 minutes with somebody and having them tell you about their job, their company, their career, it's a break from their normal day. They probably will enjoy it, and you will have gained a good contact and hopefully some information as well.
Greg, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a wonderful recommendation as it relates to informational interviews. Last but not least, our fourth question is, how do you highlight your experience on LinkedIn versus what you would put on your resume?
Yeah, that's another good question. And I have seen, and I do some training workshops around your LinkedIn profile. Sometimes I have seen people who, they spend a lot of time developing their resume and then they simply cut and paste it into your LinkedIn profile. If you're pressed for time and you're starting out, that's better than nothing. But I think there's a significant difference or fundamental difference between your resume and your LinkedIn profile. Your resume is there's sort of you're sort of limited in your resume. You don't want it to be too long, and it's there's sort of an accepted format to most resumes. LinkedIn really gives you an opportunity to kind of convey who you are as a person. Number one, you start with a picture. But you also can use a little bit more of a conversational tone. You can highlight your volunteer activities. You can highlight your interests. Your profile also has LinkedIn groups that you are a member of. And if you do publish on LinkedIn, those are all included in your profile. So think of your resume as being sort of a I hate to use the word static because earlier I said you should customize your resume, but your resume is fairly conventional, whereas your LinkedIn profile can really express a little bit more about who you are. Now, don't go too far with that. It's not Instagram, it's not Facebook. These aren't TikTok videos. Remember, LinkedIn is for professional networking, but it is an opportunity to be a little bit more expressive, a little bit more personal than your resume.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. I think that that covers all the questions that you got while you were speaking last. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before transitioning?
I think that's it. I've got a few more. Let me look at the time. Yeah, I've got just a couple more things, and then we'll have some time at the end for any final questions. So interviewing, obviously interviewing is a big part of any job search, and it continues to be a big part of job search, although almost all interviewing now is going to be done virtually, certainly right now and probably for the foreseeable future. So all of the kind of traditional best practices around interviewing as far as doing your research, being prepared, still apply, but there are some new kind of things to consider in this new world that we're in. So consider your background when doing a video interview. And by background, I don't mean your experience, your education, your skills, your literal background. What's behind you if you're doing a video interview? I've been on a lot of Zoom calls in the last month, and people love to be creative with their virtual background. Number one, a lot of them are just distracting, and number two, the technology isn't great, so you sometimes see a floating head. And I would, if you're going to use a virtual background, practice, have somebody see it first, and make sure it's appropriate and it works. You're really better off just having a regular background, make sure it's fairly nondescript, because you want the focus to be on you, not on what's happening behind you. Practice phone and video interviews, and if you have a friend, if you can set up a free Zoom meeting and just go through it and try to role play a little bit and simulate it, but just get comfortable doing it. Test the sound, test your camera. And again, when you have an interview, you want the focus to be on you and your experience, not the crackling noise in the background, the poor quality video, or things like that. There may be more rounds of interviews. It's easier to set up interviews now. You don't, if you don't have to, or the company doesn't have to reserve a conference room and rearrange everybody's schedule, or even, bring you in if you're an out-of-town candidate. So because it's easier to conduct interviews, to schedule them, there may be more rounds. It also, you may have more interviews because, unlike bringing you in and having you spend a few hours or half a day at the company to really give them an opportunity to get to know you, they're doing all of this by video, and they may want to spend a little bit more on time online trying to understand who you are. Communication, collaboration are more important than ever. If you can highlight your ability to communicate, be part of a team, particularly in a virtual environment, that's important. How do you handle challenges? Use this as an opportunity to talk about what you've done, how you've responded to the coronavirus, and how you're using that time. How resilient are you? Follow up, but not too much. As I said at the beginning, HR departments are very, very busy now with a lot of things that they had never anticipated having to do. So it may take recruiters, it may take hiring managers a little bit longer to get back to you. So if you haven't heard, I wouldn't, don't go overboard in communicating and following up, but do try to stay front and center. I did see this hashtag recently. Consider putting this in your anywhere in your social media, LinkedIn and otherwise, and it may be a way to kind of be noticed. Very quickly, I know this isn't technically about job search, but it is sort of part of your career development. So a lot of organizations now are going to virtual onboarding, and probably will continue to do that for a while. So just a few things to kind of be aware of if you are hired, that your onboarding may look very different from what you have experienced or what even the company did prior to this. So be prepared for a different type of onboarding. It's likely to be virtual. More important now when you're starting out to understand expectations. You're not going to be able to just talk to people at the next office or the next cubicle or in the break room. So ask a lot of questions, make sure you understand what is expected of you. Learn how your team communicates. Is it text messaging? Is it Jabber? Is it Slack? Is it email? How do they communicate, and what is the expectation around that? Ask a lot of questions. Remind people who you are. Everybody's got a lot going on, and unlike kind of before the pandemic, when you would maybe go out to lunch with your new colleagues, maybe lunches, happy hours were scheduled for you, where you could really get to know people, and you'd be a physical presence to remind them. Not so much of an ability to do that. And so send emails, check in, and just raise your online presence with your new company. Keep your tone clear and neutral to start off. Sometimes what is considered to be humorous or funny in person may not be conveyed the same way by email, by text, or online. So try to, if you do have a good sense of humor, just try to keep that in check in the beginning. Until you really have kind of established yourself in the company. So your role really in the very beginning, particularly if you're onboarding virtually, is to learn as much as you can and take in information, and not really setting a tone or a strong point of view at the beginning. And get to know your colleagues. Find, if you can find 1, 2, 3 people who you've connected with and have been at the company for a while that you can seek out information, bounce things off of, that's going to be helpful. A few resources, and there's a lot of information, and I think we all go to the internet for everything these days, and some of the information that we find is not reliable, and some of it is good. But I think there's a lot of good information about career development, job hunting, and even specifically job hunting in this environment. These are a few that I have used prior to this and during this period of time. So the Muse is a really, really good job site. It has jobs posted on it, but it also has resources. So there are a lot of job boards and job sites. I think this is one of the better ones. The Balance Careers is another one that I've used and I think is very good. And then LinkedIn Learning and Indeed Jobcast. Good online courses, a lot of content. Indeed is putting out webinars generally about job hunting, but there are some good specific webinars that they have about, how do you tailor your job search for a virtual environment. LinkedIn Learning also has a lot of good content about this. So those are just a few. Like I said, there's a lot. And with that, I guess just a few kind of closing comments, and then I'd be happy to answer questions. So this is a difficult time. It feels like the whole world is going through a reset, and we don't really know what the other side of that reset is going to look like, but we all know it's going to look different. So this is an opportunity to, as I said at the beginning, to really kind of evaluate where you are, and really, regardless of where you are in your career, your professional life, your personal life, take this as an opportunity to do a self-assessment and really ask yourself if you're going in the right direction, and if you aren't, maybe use it as an opportunity to change. And we're all on this road of career development, and you really, at this point, have an opportunity to decide whether you're going to pull off at the next exit and find your dream job, or you're just going to keep traveling down that road with really no destination in sight. And I would encourage you to think about what that dream job looks like and be very intentional about finding it, and then to use the analogy, pulling off and pulling into it. So hopefully some of this has been helpful. I'll put my, let me skip past that one. That's my contact information. I'm more than happy to help out if there's any way I can. I've been job hunting before, so I know what it's like, and when people have supported and assisted me, I really appreciate it, and I try to give something back. So if you have any questions after the webinar, if there's anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to reach out. But Cassie, with that, we've got a few minutes left. I'd be happy to take any last questions that might be out there.
Yeah, definitely. So we've had 3 questions since we last asked you some questions. So the first one is, how can recent college graduates be competitive in the job market with more experienced workers?
Yeah, that's a good and tough question. So yeah, there is, unlike a couple of months ago when we were basically at full employment and it was a seller's market, we're very much in a buyer's market now, the buyers being the companies. So it's going to be tough. I won't try to mislead you. There are going to be a lot of experienced people who are looking for opportunities. For college graduates, I would try to just, number one, be patient, be persistent. You may be able to, you probably have lower salary expectations than somebody who's been out of work for a while. So it's always a sensitive topic to talk about salary, but if you can convey to a potential hiring manager or recruiter that it may be they may be able to hire you for less than a more experienced worker, that might be helpful. And the main thing, and this goes in applying for any job, but really the most important thing that a recruiter or hiring manager is going to look for is how are you going to fit in at the company, and assuming that you have the basic qualifications. But if you can convey a sense of excitement, a sense of energy, a sense of enthusiasm, I think that's a selling point. And I don't want to say that those who have been out working for a while are going to be less enthusiastic, but you have the optimism and the excitement that maybe somebody who's been working, somebody who lost their job is trying to re-enter the job market. So play to that. That's a strength of yours that that I think will distinguish you, or hopefully could distinguish you from maybe somebody who's got a little more experience.
Great, Greg. Thank you. Another question was, what steps do you take to ensure that a web-based job is legitimate?
That's a good question. Yeah, I guess that's true, because it's hard to tell now. You don't go into a company and you can't sort of see what their offices look like. Well, I guess see if they're on Glassdoor, if there are reviews on Glassdoor, see if they're on LinkedIn, and if you can find any other information. If you are being interviewed, I'd ask a lot of questions about the company. How long have they been around? If it's a public company, you can search their filings. If it's not, a little bit more difficult, but ask a lot of questions. And if you do have any kind of skepticism or hesitancy, get an offer in writing, get the job description in writing, ask them to provide as much as they can to kind of legitimize who they are. So even small companies should be able to provide you job descriptions, other company policies that they may have. You should certainly get, if they make you an offer, get that in writing. And yeah, so just ask a lot of questions and be thorough in your assessment of the company.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we would suggest over in our center. So I think those are great suggestions and recommendations. And then it looks like the last question we had was, what is your advice for those of us that have had many years in one field to transition to another, specifically highlighting our skills, experience, how to be competitive breaking into a new industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, and very timely. So, and I think that's going to be very common in this environment. So, I guess the good news is that you're not alone. There are a lot of industries that are going to take a long time to come back. There are a lot that may never come back. I read something the other day about big department stores like JCPenney's and Macy's may never come back. So it's going to be very common for people who have spent many years in one industry and are transitioning to another. But kind of circling back to the very beginning, I talked about using this time. So really, as you're doing your self-assessment, think about not what company you work for or even what industry you work for, but what were your skills? Are you really good at analysis? Are you good at putting together an Excel spreadsheet? Are you good at marketing? And if you used your marketing in a bricks and mortar traditional company, but now you're moving to an online environment, how do those skills transfer? But kind of take a step back and think about what you've done, not who you've done it for or where, and how do those skills apply in this new world. And then try to describe them in a way that might appeal to a different sector or a different employer. And then this is a good opportunity to kind of tap into your network. And if you're making a career change, practice your elevator speech with friends, coworkers, former coworkers, and see how it sounds, and just get comfortable in describing yourself in a new way, or kind of rebranding yourself, and then you can fine tune it the more you practice.
I think that's another really great recommendation. That's sort of what we encourage in our Career Center as well when we're meeting with students and alumni. So thanks for that feedback. It doesn't look like there are any other questions in the chat. So I think we'll go ahead and take this time to conclude. And first and foremost, thank you so much, Greg, for joining us today. Your information is invaluable. And I'm sure that all of our participants today are going to be reaching out to you and asking you lots of questions, just as I'll do the same. So Justin's just going to go ahead and pull up a final slide with the Career Services contact information so that you can contact both Greg and us.
Okay, do I need to stop sharing? There we go. So
Perfect. Yes, that's great. And we'll stick around for the last just few minutes just to conclude. But thank you all for participating, and thank you again, Greg, for participating. Justin just has some final thoughts.
Yeah, and just real quickly, thank you, Justin and Cassie, for putting this on, and for all that you guys are doing over there in Career Services. It's always important, but it's even more important now. So appreciate the opportunity to participate, and again, thanks for putting this together.
Greg, thank you so much for your time and for talking about how we can leverage our human resources around us in navigating the job search in COVID-19. We'll give you a virtual round of applause. So just imagine.
I can hear the sound of clapping.
Yes. So real quickly, we do have another session tonight at 7 p.m. We're going to be covering pretty similar material. Hopefully we can do some justice to Greg's presentation. But if you'd like to stay in touch with Cassie and myself, we have our emails here up on the slide. You could connect with us on Twitter, LinkedIn, if you want to set up an appointment, kind of talk through some of the tips that Greg shared today about getting your LinkedIn polished, getting your resume and other documents polished. We're more than happy to spend some time doing that with you. So stay in touch. Again, if you have any friends, family members, classmates that need help right now in terms of navigating job searching, career decisions, please have them connect with us and seal the deals. We'll be back again next week, and we're going to be talking about personal branding. So if we don't have